SpaceX is accelerating towards Starship version 3, with the first ship of this brand new generation now over halfway constructed. We've also seen loads of testing at the launch pad where it will launch from, and the SpaceX Florida teams appear to be inching ever closer to installing the launch mount at historic Launch Complex 39A. And if that wasn't enough, SpaceX has finally given us the juicy details, a progress update on the Starship lunar lander design for NASA's Artemis program. This means we're going to dive deep into all the nitty-gritty technical details and cover everything we can in this Starbase update. Let's start off by talking about that major progress update from SpaceX on the Starship human landing system. If you're a regular viewer of our weekly news show, This Week in Spaceflight, and if you're not, you totally should be, you would have seen more of the spaceflight drama side of things with the recent comments from NASA Acting Administrator Sean Duffy regarding Starship HLS. Our latest episode from last Friday covers this big update from that perspective, but here on Starbase Update, we'll be focusing on the technical side of things, because while the update is meant to act as a public response to Duffy's comments, it does provide us with a great deal of information that we didn't have before. That being said, some of the things mentioned in the update we were already aware of, such as the docking adapter qualification campaign that took place early last year, testing the system that will allow Starship to dock to Orion in space. That's based on the Dragon 2 docking system, tried and tested with the International Space Station. We also knew about the Raptor testing regarding the demonstration of the lunar deorbit burn, and testing the relight capabilities of Raptor after having been in extremely cold conditions. On the channel, we've also previously covered past updates regarding the testing of the Starship HLS elevator, which the company has been carrying out at their Hawthorne facilities over the past several years. In these simulations, they tested not only the elevator system itself, but also a full-sized mock-up of the lander's airlock and its operation, with people on board wearing replicas of the Axiom lunar spacesuit that will be used during Artemis 3. These simulations allowed the SpaceX, Axiom and NASA teams to rehearse future moonwalk operations, during which the astronauts will have to exit the airlock, enter the elevator, and descend to the lunar surface. But these are just the few known milestones out of the 49 that SpaceX says they have completed so far regarding HLS. Some of these are quite interesting, such as the fact that they have tested the navigation sensors for the lander, or that they have already demonstrated systems like radio frequency communications on the ground segment side of operations. In the update, SpaceX also says they've tested shielding against micrometeoroid and orbital debris, what's often known as MMOD. They say they've analysed different materials stacked on top of each other in order to protect against impacts and harsh thermal conditions. One of the pictures from this update that has MMOD torch in its file name shows what appears to be a white tile being blasted by a torch. As far as we know, HLS isn't supposed to have tiles or endure those kinds of temperatures, but perhaps this was meant to replicate other kinds of thermal and kinetic damage, and maybe HLS will in fact have its own tiles. We just don't know right now. Of course, with so many milestones completed, it makes sense that some of these relate to testing medical systems or undergoing integrated planning to establish flight rules, crew procedures, and much more. Over the past several years, they've also been testing the crew displays, which SpaceX showcases in one of the pictures as well. It also caught our attention that SpaceX mentioned they have carried out a quote, landing leg drop test of a full-scale article at Flight Energies onto simulated lunar regolith to verify system performance and to study foot-to-regolith interaction. That is quite interesting, as a full-scale article would imply something rather large, yet we have not seen any reports of such a thing being observed, for example at SpaceX's Hawthorne facilities, and we have certainly not seen anywhere at Starbase that could have hosted a similarly large-scale test without it being noticed. However, over the past several months, there has been one location where a large structure has been set up that could potentially host this kind of testing, and that is at SpaceX's McGregor test facility. This structure was initially built as a form of scaffolding, but it has since been covered in tarps. McGregor is where SpaceX has a lot of its expertise and test areas for propulsion and high-pressure systems, so at first the thought was that perhaps they were testing something related to the HLS engines there. However, not only do they test all of the engines they produce at McGregor, but it is also where they conduct tests such as detonating Starship test tanks, detonating COPVs, and even carrying out methane-oxygen impact testing for explosive yield research. Included in that list is also the testing of the Falcon 9 landing leg system, which uses compressed helium to release the legs for landing. We've seen the test stand for that. So who is to say they could not be testing something similar inside the tarp structure, but for HLS? In fact, in recent weeks, we have seen what appears to be puffs of smoke or venting coming from the tent. With a little imagination, it is not difficult to think that this could even be the simulated lunar regolith being displaced from the enclosed structure as they test that foot-to-regolith interaction they mentioned. I'm sure that if this isn't the case, a lot of people at SpaceX might be finding all this speculation rather amusing, but you know, they could have shown us pictures and videos of that landing leg test just like they did for some of the other things, you know. Just saying, SpaceX, just saying. The Starship HLS architecture also relies on the propellant storage depot and the propellant tankers. One of the milestones completed, according to SpaceX, is a demonstration of the depot power module, which tested, quote, prototype electrical power generation and distribution systems planned to be used on the propellant depot variant of Starship. This is quite an important aspect to test, considering the depot may remain in orbit for weeks or months at a time, so it must be powered for the entire duration. Additionally, SpaceX says they have undergone hardware-in-the-loop testing regarding the upcoming propellant transfer demonstration flight, something that's also important if they ever want to get Starship anywhere beyond low Earth orbit. SpaceX also states that they have tested a full-scale cabin fitted with life support and thermal control systems, which also has been inhabited by people. This is most likely the nosecone they have near the rocket garden, which we saw being fabricated some time ago and had HLS marked on it. It also had several control systems attached at the bottom, so it was quite clear that it was probably related to crew cabin testing. But we may soon see another one, as SpaceX also states in the update that they have already begun fabricating a flight article cabin for ground testing, which will include not only the life support systems, but also all of the power systems, communications, and avionics required for flight. This will allow them to integrate everything they have been testing for the cabin over the past several years into one flight-like structure ahead of building the first Starship HLS. This is quite interesting because, if you recall from recent episodes, we mentioned it had been a long time since we saw what we believe to be the Ship 44 nosecone through the Starfactory windows. It would not be surprising if that one was taken out of the production line for this flight article cabin, but obviously it is difficult to tell since we have not seen it again. We do hope, however, that at some point, once this HLS cabin is completed, it may leave the Starfactory and be placed somewhere around Starbase for testing of its systems, just like the previous one was. Now, one significant piece of the puzzle missing from this HLS update is the timelines. We also have no information about the sequencing of flights or the number of flight tests that will be required before HLS carries astronauts to the lunar surface. What we do know, however, is that next year they plan to conduct a long-duration flight of a ship in orbit and an in-space propellant transfer test, which will be carried out using that same long-endurance ship. As we have seen most recently with Ship 39, upcoming version 3 ships are equipped with a probe and drogue docking system. Some will feature the drogue side of the docking system, while others will have the docking probe. SpaceX released some renders this week, not only of what the interior of the HLS Starship will look like, but also renders of the depot and tanker variants of Starship. These also come with brief descriptions. For example, in the case of the depot, it states that the propellant tanks have increased volume to maximize propellant capacity, and the spacecraft's exterior optical properties are optimized for long-duration propellant storage while in Earth orbit. In the case of the tanker variant, it mentions that it shares the design of the core Starship vehicle, that is, the ships we are seeing right now, and has the docking probes for connecting with other ships, as we discussed earlier. On the topic of docking ships together, it was interesting that SpaceX stated they are going to use the same DragonEye navigation system that is used on Dragon, and that they have also tested it for use on Starship. Now, we said a big missing piece from this update was the timelines, but there is also another element that appears in many of these renders which SpaceX makes absolutely no mention of: the landing thrusters. For some reason, SpaceX has yet to even acknowledge the existence of these outside the renders and older descriptions of the lander, despite having clearly altered their design over the years, as evidenced by the differences in number and size of these thrusters in the renders over the last 5 years. Another thing missing is their plans to accelerate the HLS schedule. As mentioned at the start, this entire update was released in response to NASA Acting Administrator Sean Duffy stating that the agency was reopening the Artemis 3 lander contract and that Starship was behind schedule. NASA gave SpaceX and Blue Origin until the 29th of October to present a plan to accelerate their lunar lander schedules and beat China back to the moon. While in the update, SpaceX states that they have shared a simplified mission architecture and concept of operations, they have not revealed what is in that proposal, nor how they intend to progress from their current position. That being said, Elon Musk has been hinting for quite some time now that the simplest and best way forward would be to just let SpaceX handle everything and scrap SLS, scrap Orion, but I have a feeling that would require a little bit more convincing for NASA to accept. Once again, if you want more details on the NASA drama behind this entire update, make sure to check out This Week in Spaceflight, because it's not just SpaceX building a lander, but Blue Origin too. Now, all of those future milestones and plans cannot happen without the debut of version 3, and that is going to happen with Ship 39 and Booster 18. While we haven't had any updates with Booster 18 since last week, Ship 39 has received quite a lot of attention this week. If you recall from the last Starbase update, the vehicle's nosecone and payload bay combined stack had been moved from the Starfactory to Mega Bay 2 and stacked onto the ship's forward dome section. Our own Gage was out in the field a few days later and managed to take a look inside the Mega Bay and see Ship 39 stacked on its forward dome section. With that work completed, this week teams moved the ship's common dome section into Mega Bay 2 for stacking, followed later in the week by the rolling and stacking of the next barrel section underneath. From the looks of it so far, it seems that version 3 ships will have the same number of barrel sections and the same number of stainless steel rings per barrel section compared to version 2 Starships. This is something that could have easily changed if SpaceX had wished, given that some of the tank sizes are being restructured with the new version. We explained about a month and a half ago that the aft dome, which forms the base of the liquid oxygen tank, has been lowered to increase propellant capacity. In exchange, the Raptor vacuums, which used to be mounted directly onto the dome, will now be partially recessed into the liquid oxygen tank in their own dedicated enclosures, similar to the new version 3 booster grid fins. A change like that could have caused a cascading effect on all of the barrel sections above and the number of rings on them and so forth, but so far it's pretty much the same, which means there are only 2 remaining barrel sections to complete Ship 39's primary structure. Part of stacking a ship includes integrating its plumbing, and in recent days inside the Starfactory we have seen a ship transfer tube installation jig with the transfer tubes already fitted. At some point during the stacking process, this jig will be moved from the Starfactory to Mega Bay 2, and then Ship 39 will be lifted and lowered over it to allow for the installation of the transfer tubes on the common dome. These transfer tubes also appear to follow the same design as version 2, which featured a central methane transfer line for the 3 center Raptor engines and a dedicated transfer tube for each of the RVAC engines. As we often say, vehicle production work is not just about the very next flight, but also future flights, and SpaceX is preparing for all of that across multiple locations. Inside Mega Bay 2, SpaceX has been busy outfitting the interior with a 4th new workstation, as well as installing several work platforms at different levels to provide easier access to key areas of the ships. At the Sanchez lot, teams have been manufacturing new booster transport stands for version 3, as well as converting old version 2 booster transport stands into version 3 stands. Over the past week, they began that conversion process on one of the version 2 stands by removing the 20 clamp arms and alignment pins that were used on the previous version of boosters. As usual each week, we also try to spot changes on the ship nose cones visible through the Starfactory glass windows. Compared to last week, Ship 40's nose cone has received even more tiles than we had previously seen, and Ship 41's nose cone is already getting heat shield tiles fitted as we speak. Ship 42's nose cone still awaits heat shield installation, and we are waiting to see when Ship 43 and 45 move to the tile pin installation area so they can proceed with their next steps in production. While out at the Starfactory looking through the windows, our own Caesar also spotted what appears to be a booster barrel section staged near the large door of the Starfactory. We know it's a booster section for 2 reasons. It does not have tile pins, and it also has the aerodynamic chine rail where SpaceX installs the COPVs on the hull of the booster. This also means it is a barrel section for the liquid oxygen tank, so it could potentially be for Booster 19 now that Booster 18 has all of its different barrel sections. Once Booster 18 is fully stacked, it will free up one of the 2 welding turntables inside Mega Bay 1, making way for Booster 19 stacking to begin, so perhaps that is why this section is staged here. Let's quickly check in with the Massey's outpost, as it is a rather important place for future vehicles. There, SpaceX has the B-18.1 and B-18.3 test tanks, which are for testing the aft and forward end of the next generation boosters respectively. Following a short test campaign about a month ago, B-18.3 has not been tested again and is now apparently being worked on internally. There is now scaffolding being installed around its access hatch, and we've seen crews going in and out of the tank every now and then. There must be something happening there for that sort of work to be required, but of course there's no way to know for certain. You may also recall that the Massey's outpost suffered major damage to its ship static fire facilities during the Ship 36 explosion back in June. Over the last several months, SpaceX has been rebuilding and upgrading that area, and recently our team in the field has been able to observe some of that work. This has included the addition of new version 3 ship clamps to the static fire stand, which has been undergoing intensive refurbishment since the explosion. The servo structure that will connect to the ship to supply fluid and data connections is also progressing quite well, and we hope everything is up and running by the time Ship 39 is complete and requires static fire testing here. So we've covered production and test sites at Starbase, but there is of course the launch site. At Starbase's Pad 2, crews continue to outfit the launch mount service structure with cladding to protect it against the forces of launch. Last week we mentioned the vents present in this structure to keep it ventilated and aid in the purging of hazardous gases during launch operations. It turns out these vents won't be out in the open, but will in fact be fitted with covers to direct that venting down the structure. These resemble similar covers that we see on the booster and ship, which we nicknamed cowbell vents, so I suppose these are like those but just larger. In the last few weeks, SpaceX has also been working on testing the movement of the 2 booster quick disconnect umbilicals located on the launch mount. This week, most of the testing seemed to focus on the simultaneous retraction of both QDs. It's not easy to do this, as both have to be disconnected from the booster at the same time and retract into their protective hoods before being blasted by the Raptor engines during liftoff. For the moment, these movements appear slow, likely to fine-tune the motion and timing, but we may see full-speed simultaneous retraction tests soon. We've also begun to see venting from the base of the service structure, which was likely a sign of SpaceX starting to purge the propellant lines leading into the launch mount. It may not be long before we actually see them purging through the QDs ahead of placing Booster 18 on the mount for testing. Next door to the launch mount on the tower, there was some completely unexpected testing of the chopstick landing rails this week. At the rear of the tower, teams have also been continuing to run more wiring up to the new cable tray installed last month. This tray leads up to the level for the ship QD arm, so we must be very close to that being installed on the tower. That's not just because of the wiring though. At the Sanchez lot, crews have continued working on the arm, and there have been some interesting additions recently. For example, they've added pieces of hardware which are brackets for the swivel joints that will be used on the main propellant lines connecting the arm to the tower. They've also run some pipes to the back section of the arm, indicating further progress in preparing that part ahead of installation on the tower. As you can see, there's still plenty of scaffolding around the arm, so until that's removed, don't be expecting a rollout just yet. To prepare for future launches, another important place to keep an eye on is SpaceX's McGregor test site. Over the past week, SpaceX has conducted 26 Raptor tests at the site, and while that might sound like quite a bit more than usual, they're somewhat cheating. This is because the higher number of tests doesn't necessarily mean more engines are being tested, but rather individual engines are being tested more frequently. And the reason I say that is because the majority of these tests were relight tests. Some of these took place on the 28th of October, with Raptor North seeing an 80-second burn followed less than a minute later by a 15-second burn. Later that day on the Raptor South stand, another engine first underwent a 137-second burn and then relit 3 more times for 3 tests lasting 20 seconds each. That was before a 4th relight with a 14-second burn. The Raptor South vertical stand then saw another series of relight tests on the 31st of October, starting with a burn lasting 98 seconds, followed by 5 relights and burns of 20 seconds each. So if you do the maths, that's 13 tests for just 3 engines, and given that the Raptor South stand hosted 11 of these, it wouldn't be surprising if they all occurred on the same engine but on different days. We've also continued to see burns lasting 114 seconds on the Raptor vertical stand, which seems far too consistent to be tests just for the sake of testing, so it wouldn't be surprising if these are acceptance tests for the first version 3 booster engines. In the last week, we've also observed 2 long duration burns at the Raptor South stand, the first on the 29th lasting 240 seconds, and the second on the 30th lasting 409 seconds. That latter burn broke the record for the longest burn at that particular stand, which had previously been set in September with a 354-second burn. Also on the 31st of October, SpaceX tested another engine on the vertical stand which, rather fittingly for Halloween, decided it no longer wanted to function. Of course, we not only see and hear Raptor testing at McGregor, but we can also spot hardware on the move. This week, SpaceX was transporting 3 Raptor 3 engines all at once. Two of them appear to be serial numbers 43 and 46, which would make them the highest serial numbers we've seen for Raptor 3 engines so far. Needless to say, activity is picking up at McGregor, and there are now many more newer engines as expected in the lead up to version 3. Back to Starbase, teams continue to dismantle and strip down old hardware at Pad 1. Over the past week, they've been working on the chopstick arms, removing all the outdated equipment, as well as anything obstructing the upgrades for version 3. One of these upgrades includes cutting the arm shorter for quicker movement, and it seems they've already been marked for cutting in situ, rather than being taken down and worked on elsewhere. So, at some point, we'll see the chopsticks being chopped. Maybe I need to get Sawyer's help on that one. At the rear of the tower, teams are also removing the housing for the drawworks and the external access stairs. It's likely all of this will be upgraded to the same standards we now see at Pad 2's tower, which looks far neater and better shielded than Tower 1. On the launch mount, teams began stripping out the interior of the structure by removing various pieces of equipment. They have also cut much of the external piping, including the main propellant lines and engine chill pipes that were previously used here. As we mentioned last week, they also plan to cut the shielding, and indeed, that's what started happening this week. Sections of shielding have started to be removed from different parts of the launch mount, allowing us to see inside for the first time in around 3 years. In recent days, teams have also begun cutting away the booster quick disconnect hood that used to protect the booster umbilicals. Eventually, this launch mount will be completely stripped and dismantled, transforming the area into a clean site for digging and constructing a flame trench similar to the one at Pad 2. However, it will probably be several months before we see any kind of large-scale construction here. Personally, I wouldn't be too shocked if SpaceX will use data from Starbase Pad 2 and Launch Complex 39A in Florida to better inform the infrastructure at Starbase Pad 1 and Space Launch Complex 37. The Pad 1 side of the tank farm is also being dismantled, with most of the liquid oxygen subcoolers removed and pumps taken away as well. The methane side of the tank farm has likewise been undergoing removal, with pumps and piping being taken apart. As we discussed last week, we also expected the deluge tank farm to be removed and upgraded to the new standards seen at Pad 2, and that is exactly what happened this week. While most of this demolition work may take some time, I can assure you that once the majority of it is completed, we'll look back and think this was just in a blink of an eye. If you think this is the first time SpaceX has taken apart a Starship launch mount, you'd be forgetting they've already done exactly that in Florida. Twice, in fact. SpaceX began constructing a Starship launch pad at Launch Complex 39A based on Pad 1's old design, and then dismantled it. And now it's a completely different story with the Pad 2 design. Over the past week, SpaceX has been working hard preparing that pad to receive its new launch mount. The LR13000 monster crane was activated and has been fitted with the load spreader that will be used to lift the launch mount. We're not sure when the roll of the launch mount might occur, but it could be soon by the time you're watching this. We'll of course be covering it on Space Coast Live 24/7, and we'll spool up a dedicated live stream whenever it takes place. Rest assured, we'll have many cameras pointed at this monolithic structure as it rolls down the Saturn Causeway. In preparation for this roll and lift, teams have also installed the flame diverter cap that joins both halves of the flame bucket and protects their tip from the blast of the Raptor engines. Although this installation did not seem to go exactly to plan, as it was first installed, then removed, and then installed again. Here's hoping that didn't delay some of the launch mount roll plans. In the last few days, SpaceX also received the delivery of several vertical tanks for the Starship tank farm at 39A, and more hardware is being staged outside the base every day, as our own Julia Bergeron can confirm herself. The LC-39A tower also gained a rather fancy new addition in the form of the tower drawworks, which will be used to lift and lower the chopstick carriage system once it is reeved with a wire. While that progress was underway in the launch area, future production of Starship vehicles in Florida will take place at the Giga Bay being built at SpaceX's Roberts Road operations area. That location is a bit harder to access, and we often get a view through our flyovers, but from the press site we can see most of the Giga Bay construction. That building is going to be so large it will be visible from quite a distance. It'll almost look like the VAB's younger sibling. In the last few days, one of the two tower cranes active at the site has grown taller as SpaceX continues to add more levels to the Florida Giga Bay. At Starbase, there is also another Giga Bay under construction, and over the past week it has received considerably more attention as it begins to receive its steel beams and columns. SpaceX has also activated both of the first two tower cranes for its construction, and a third one has been assembled since our last episode. It would not be surprising if, by this time next week, the third crane is operational and the fourth one is beginning to be put together. But of course, that's a story for next week. For now, I've been Ryan Caton for NSF, thanks for watching, and goodbye.